and it is my great pleasure to introduce our next panel in defense sector. I would like to welcome the moderator, Daniel Bilak, partner at Kinstellar. Daniel is also a member of the executive committee of the US-Ukraine Business Council and has been invited to co-chair the organization's defense working group. And Dan has also been the chairman, like the head of Ukraine Investment Promotion Office in the government of Ukraine. Welcome, Dan.
With you.
Welcome, Dan, and pleasure, and have a productive discussion.
Дякую, дякую. Thank you, Ilana. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to introduce our panel today. It is an A-list panel. I mean, you can tell by everybody packed in this room. We have Wahid Nawabi, who is the CEO of AeroVironment, came all the way from the US just for this panel. Nataliya Bugayova, who is a non-resident fellow at the Institute for Study of War. That needs no introduction. The coolest guy in the government, no need for an introduction, Oleksandr Kamyshin. Eveline Buchatskiy, managing partner at D3 Venture Capital. And last but certainly not least, Lorenz Meier, founder and CEO of Auterion, which has now become a software powerhouse in building common operating standards for autonomous drones. I actually know those terms now. You know, that's how much of a transformation we're talking about in this sector. So, turn around so I can see everybody. What I'd really like to do is we're going to cover. We have an hour, so we're going to cover. We got a lot of territory to cover with a list like. Maybe just move the chairs down. It's a little cramped. A lot of territory to cover here, and I think everybody's used to the fact that there's now big defense industry, there's defense tech, et cetera, et cetera. I think that we need to start with to contextualize how this happened, and to understand the magnitude of the transformation. When I was at Ukraine Invest, I was advisor to the Prime Minister and the head of Ukraine Invest, and one of the things I was trying to do was get a defense industry started. This is in 2016 to 2019, and I begged the government to hive off Antonov, which was part of Ukroboronprom, now rebranded as Ukrainian Defense Industries, because I had Dassault, I had Boeing, I had Airbus, all wanting to do business with Antonov, but none of them would do it while it was part of Ukroboronprom. And the defense sector was it was shut down. Never mind defense tech. It was a monopoly. Nobody got in, and it was just them and us. That has been completely transformed. And when we did the Rheinmetall deal, I was shocked that we did it in 2 weeks, or acted for Rheinmetall. It was the first time that was a joint venture in Ukraine that to create between one of Ukroboronprom's children and a global company where the ownership and the corporate governance was part of Rheinmetall's. So, Oleksandr, you're sort of, when you were at the Ministry of Strategic Industries, you were essentially the architect of this transformation. And you're too modest to say that, but I'll say that. You're the architect of this transformation. How did you manage to do it so quickly? How were you able to harness those resources that had been so deeply embedded in the state and release them so that the private sector could start to operate in Ukraine in the defense industrial space?
Then thanks for the good speech, but it was not as good as my president's speech recently. And the story was quite easy. Let's get back to some decades ago. You know that in Soviet time, we already got great defense industry. We've got over 2,000 factories, and that industry was quite strategic, I would say. Then for decades, it was neglected for some reason. As you said, no one could do any deal with Ukraine in defense industry. And at some point, when we started the war, when we faced the war, when we entered the war, we've been fighting with what we've got in stock, with Javelins, with Bayraktars, and then with what arrived from the whole world, from the whole free world, from our strategic partners. And we've been fighting with all that equipment coming from different countries. And 2023, my president said we should get more from our local industry. So jumping into today, he announced that 40% of what we've got in the front line is what we produce locally. Wow. It was not always like that. I would give you some scary figures. 2021, the year before the Great War began, but already 9 years in the war, we've got 0 ammunition produced, just 0. 2022, we've got only 50,000 rounds of all calibers produced for the whole year. 2024, as my president announced recently, we've got 2.4 million rounds from 30 millimeter NATO caliber to 155 millimeter NATO caliber. And you probably know that when we've got some people coming to Ukraine from the Western world in 2022, bringing some drones, we said, listen, that's something great, we really need it. In 2023, we've got those people coming and bringing some components, usually. Radio, video, something else. Now you know that they are coming and trying to learn from what we've got. And it's not only in aerial drones, it's land systems, it's sea drones, all types of unmanned systems. So at this point, Ukraine is building itself as a powerhouse for defense industry. And as my president said recently, that's the key to security of the whole Europe.
Yep. We're going to drill down into that, but the takeaway I have from your comments is we had all of these resources in place. They weren't properly allocated or rationally allocated or allocated for a different purpose. And you were able to harness them and add into that the technology side as well. And this is what we're seeing today. Is that an accurate statement? Because that's really interesting, because that's on the Ukraine side. And then we have Wahid, you guys, everybody was saying Russia will take Ukraine, Kyiv in 3 days, Kyiv in 3 days. Ukraine doesn't stand a chance, it's all over. And meanwhile, AeroVironment was stocking up switchblades and other drones for 6 months beforehand. Like, what do you know that the rest of them didn't?
Yeah, we actually did start way in advance. We actually built a factory dedicated to Switchblade about 2 to 3 years before the conflict started. Initial investment, and the factory was already up and running by the time the actual conflict officially started. But before that, I went and made a really difficult decision, what turned out to be actually an easy decision that I always thought was easy, and a very good one, which was to go pre-order materials and start building for thousands of Switchblades. 3,000, I think it was the initial number.
You're doing this on spec, basically.
Not even spec. We didn't even have a promise of anything. We wanted to build it because we knew that, how I mean, Switchblade is the first loitering munition. We invented the category, essentially, because there was no such thing as a loitering munition before Switchblade.
The king of loitering munitions.
Switchblade is, yeah. And so its efficacy was already proven, although there was no public video of Switchblade ever for over a decade. And it was involved in many conflicts before that I can't, get into details. So we did that, yes. We did it because we knew, A, it was for the right cause, and number two was because we realized that it's going to make a huge difference. But, we have 12, 13 different products. 11, I think, of them are in use in Ukraine, if not more, today. We started actually this is a sort of interesting little tidbit. We started a daily internal meeting led by a colleague of mine, gentleman Charlie Dean, who's sitting in the front line, great warrior too. Daily, it's called Operation Kyiv. And we still have that going on in our company. And it was a little bit before the war started. He started it before then. And the reason
was...
Not the war. Oh. The actual internal AV meeting. And we do it, yes, we run a business, it's a business, but that's not what it is for us. It's not only business. We do it also because it's the right cause. And, there's a lot of connections here.
That's an amazing backstory.
Yeah.
And, as a counterpoint to that, we have Lorenz's company, Auterion, which at the start of the war had a completely different use case. You were very much, as I understand, involved in the civilian sector. And now you're one of the leading companies in the defense sector, software, command systems for drones. How did that happen?
Well,
we were focused on inspection, mapping, and reconnaissance. We've actually worked with the U.S. Department of Defense for the past 7 years on reconnaissance, but we made the switch to basically say, like, we cannot hold our technology back from loitering munitions. And so we've pushed really fast and hard into building terminal guidance for FPV drones, for fixed-wing drones. And our model is to work with local Ukrainian manufacturers and to partner very, very closely to build an integrated product where we bring some of our advanced guidance systems, and they bring all the knowledge, learnings from the battlefield, and we can cover a whole portfolio of systems that also gives the customer a choice, right? Because there are many different companies now the government can buy from that we're part of.
So essentially, was that like an inflection point for your company? I mean, you make it sound like, okay, one day we were doing this and we decided to do that. To me, it sounds like you made a pretty wrenching decision to change course.
I think it is wrenching for a lot of tech companies that haven't been as long in defense, or let's say the loitering munition lethal part, as AeroVironment has been and has been in a leading position. So I think for a lot of companies also in the US, in Europe, there was a point to basically adopt as a founder or as a staff to say, like, no, we're okay building lethal products because it's needed. It's the only way to establish, re-establish safety, security, and deterrence.
Well, we'll get to that. That's a crucial point because there are a lot of banks and financial institutions that need to make that leap. Before we want to go further, I want to actually recognize Minister Herman Smetanyan, who's here with us today from the Ministry of Strategic Industries. Thank you very much, Mr. Minister, for coming today. Part of the Kamyshin Smetanyan dream team of defense industrial development. But and coming back, Eveline, that's a good segue from what Lorenz was talking about into what you're doing, because you are a key part, D3 Venture Capital. What's one of the things, everybody talks about all these defense companies and startups innovating, but if you don't have money to lube that system, it seizes up pretty quickly. And so you guys saw this very quickly. How did you, as a young Brazilian American tech investor, end up running one of the leading VC companies in Ukraine in this sector?
Yeah, my passion to defend Ukraine is long-standing. It's been over 10 years, so I was part of Maidan as well. But, you know, back a year and a half ago, 2 years ago, actually, around the Davos conference, a major investor in the US came to me and said, I don't want to be another war tourist that goes to Ukraine to take a photo with Zelensky and comes back and does nothing for Ukraine. I actually want to have an impact quickly. What's the best way? And to me, it was clear that there was a vacuum in funding of defense companies. And there is still a vacuum. Tremendous progress. So first year of war, essentially zero investment into defense tech in Ukraine. Second year, 25 million. Just to give you a sense, one of my portfolio companies, not in Ukraine, received more funding than the entire ecosystem last year. However, the baseline was pretty low. So, you know, if you think about the baseline, there has been tremendous progress, and this year it's going to be explosive in terms of capital investment into defense tech. We play the early stage, seed stage investment, which was non-existent, and from there, it's our job to unveil these gems to the rest of the world so other investors in the US and Europe can take to the next level and turn these companies into global defense success stories.
Oleksandr, so we've heard the backstories of these companies. How did you were in charge, how did you manage to integrate? I know, I get to her, she's segueing. We got a plan. Mm-hmm. How did you manage to pull all of this together and to make it function? Because you had your ministry, you had the Ministry of Defense, you had the Ministry of Digital Transformation, had the general staff. That's not an easy circus to be a ringmaster for. I've been in the government 4 times. I've seen it. It's not a pretty picture. How did you manage to get these partnerships to work together in such a short period of time?
So first of all, when we got, like as Lorenz said, we are fine with doing something that is lethal. It sounds so warm to me because whatever we get in our hands in Ukraine, first idea we got whether it can fly to Moscow and hit some Russians. And definitely, first we started doing something, then we started reshaping the industry and building the ecosystem. Any one of you got pet cube tool at your home for your pets? I've got it. Anyone got it? So we got the founder of this company here in the room. And you know why? Not because of PetCube, but because of his DefenceTech company. He is great in AI, in targeting, in DefenceTech, in drones. And we've got so many people here turning into defense industry for something from something different. Some time ago, Eveline was doing great job in incubator for startups in Ukraine, nothing to do with defense industry. And many other people have been doing pretty much different job, but never defense industry. And all of us, at some point, started doing something that can fly to Moscow and hit Russians. Later, we decided to build something around that and to shape it as the whole industry. Some point we understood that we need funding, and then Eveline came and said, listen, I'm searching companies which I can fund. And the first meeting we've got was on the run, actually. We've been running some 10 kilometers around the park, and that's where we agreed to move on together. And Yaroslav said, listen, let's build the volley, the defense volley in Ukraine, because actually that's what we already got. And let's shape it as the defense volley. We want to be the arsenal of the free world. We want to be the place where it's born. And yes, we would be happy to share it back to the Europe, to the whole free world, to US as well. So first we started doing things, then we've been shaping them, and now we've been trying to rearrange them.
That's a great summary of where we are today and how we got there. And we are, Oleksandr is very concerned I haven't brought Nataliya in, but there's a good reason for that, because she's now got, she's going to explain something different. Actually, we have an anniversary today. 10 years ago, I moderated my first defense panel at the Kiev Post-Tiger conference that Nataliya organized with General Hertling. So I'm really happy I can reciprocate. Nataliya moved on, of course. She went to the Institute for the Study of War. And it's that has been really the go-to place for information. And it's not just a news site. The analytics, especially because we're talking about Ukraine here, what's happening inside, that's the one place that really does a deep dive on what's going on in Russia and what they're thinking and what was the impact, and this is a question, what was the impact of those first months of the war on the Russian thinking, and what are they thinking now as the battlefield situation has changed from your perspective?
Thank you, Dan. I would like to bridge the conversation about capabilities in Western and Ukrainian defense industrial base to Kremlin's thinking and decision-making. The main conversation now is about a durable peace, which is not possible without a deterrent. And deterrent is not going to be credible for the Kremlin if there is no strength and ability to surge, especially in the Western defense industrial base. To your point, Kremlin absolutely uses assessments of scale, ability to surge, ability to sustain of the Western defense industrial base in its military planning. And for the last 3 years, Russia took advantage and exploited of the fact that Europe did not fully surge on behalf of Ukraine, and that US could, but it did not. Right now, we're in a phase where Russia's objectives haven't changed, and all the requests for territory or neutrality are just, they conceal Putin's real request, which is surrender. And as long as there's hope for him that he can achieve that objective militarily or otherwise, he will continue to fight. Now, I think the goal right now is to send an unambiguous signal to Russia that Putin cannot achieve his objective of subjugating Ukraine in his lifetime. Weak defense industrial base, that's a signal that gives him hope. Strong defense industrial base, it's a way to strip Putin of the hope of achieving those objectives. So I think it's a direct impact on Kremlin's decision making. And we're at the point right now where some people think that this problem can go away and you can put the genie back in the bottle and go back to the status quo. And I think West has been supporting Ukraine a few months at a time. Now it's actually the time for long-term strategic planning of the DIB so that Russian military projections years into the war are not going to have hope for that they can take either Ukraine fully or really exploit vulnerabilities in Europe as well.
That's a great insight. Thank you. This brings us probably now a good segue. That was a good segue into the next block that I wanted to talk about, which is the changing nature of the warfare itself. And the question is the war winnable if Ukraine scales and pushes the development of technology in this sphere? At a granular level, this is no longer even about assault brigades going across fields. My nephew was pulled out of a cauldron on the Kupiansk front last week, which was really touch and go. And he called me when they got out, and he said, this is insane. He says, we're hardly even shooting at each other. He said, all we do is dodge drones all day. And we're there for every 4 of theirs, we've got 1 of ours. And they're recon drones, and then they come in, and the other things drop their stuff. So the whole nature of the battlefield has changed. And so in terms of these dynamics, Nataliya, how should Ukraine adapt, both from not so much a battlefield strategy, although you've probably done a deep dive into that too, but from your perspective, how does that work operationally?
I think a couple of points. One, I think one of the major lessons, it's not just about specific capabilities. It's about operational concept and how they're organized for effects. There are always going to be limited resources, especially if we talk about high-end capabilities such as interceptors or long-range one-way attack. But it's about creating an operating concept that uses it for effect. I think second, the defense industrial innovation thinking should also start with the adversary. And the question is, what are we trying to do to the enemy, in what way, to what end? And starting with critical assessment of critical vulnerabilities, we need to have a running assessment of Russia's centers of gravity and critical vulnerabilities and actually start planning capability building from that. So I think the innovation needs to be a lot more adversary focused. I think finally, Russia right now, for example, is trying to centralize its innovation. And it may figure it out with time, so they're adapting. But now, and my colleagues have written about it, they're suffering temporarily setbacks. So the goal is right now to invest in Ukraine's DIP faster than Russia adapts and centralizes its own innovation to preserve Ukraine's advantage in the innovation cycle. I think final point, it's not just about material, it's about people and organizing free and leading free people is no small fit. So it's creating an ecosystem that really helps Ukraine harness entrepreneurial spirit, and I'm sure Eveline can talk more about that, of the teams, while also doing it in time and space that matters to have effects on the adversaries. I think that's the suspense and that and balance that Ukraine will need to.
It's a really good perspective. Wahid, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, I just wanted to add.
What are you doing to the adversary?
Well, the question you pose is a very, very important question, which is, what is the paradigm change? Is there a paradigm change? If it is, what it is, and what does that mean for the industry, right? This is something that is actually very at the core of AV as a company. I'm not sure if some of you are aware, but our strategic intent, I would say our strategy of future, we call it our future state, is to have a portfolio of intelligent, distributed, multi-domain robotic systems. And so we've picked every single one of those words very carefully. It starts from the beginning of the company, 30 years ago, when we first actually introduced small drones to the US military. The US military actually did not know how to operationalize small drones. This is before the Desert Storm conflict, Afghanistan, Iraq, well before that. And so we actually realized that there's an incredible value in how drones are going to play a role in national security and defense. And so the words, I want to explain a little bit, not too much, a little bit, of why it was, to me, came visceral when a 3-star Air Force general came and told me. He's like, Switchblade is changing stuff. This is very recent, of course, 3-4 years ago.
God forbid.
Yeah, but I said, what do you mean? He's like, I used to be an Air Force pilot, U.S. Air Force pilot, and he would fly somewhere on a base in Italy during the Sarajevo conflict. And he would kiss his wife and kids goodbye after breakfast. He said, I would go into the base, get into the cockpit, fly an F-16 or an F-18, and I had a mission that morning was given to me to go hit a target that was developed the night before. It was from a satellite imagery, right? And so think about this concept of operation, right? You get a Air Force that collects data from a satellite imagery, that gives it to a pilot the next morning that says, there's a target, there's a target, there's a target. And then he said, I would fly, and 70% of the time I'd come back and have dinner with my kids, and I would not hit a target. I would just not hit any targets because the target changed, and I couldn't prosecute the target. What Ukraine is showing us, and what Switchblade and other things like that, and FPVs, all of these are doing, is it's allowing a small force the size of us in the battlefield, not going through a 3-star and a 4-star general, through a long chain of command, to actually go and find a target, within minutes fire a weapon, to prosecute the target with almost no collateral damage, literally almost. I mean, it's been over a decade. There's not a single civilian innocent hit with a Switchblade. Single. I do not know of a single one. There's been not successful missions, like the target wasn't hit, but no target that was hit that was civilian or innocent life. 0 so far, and thousands of them that we shipped. So this chain of command, this paradigm is shifting mindsets in military leaders and strategists and people that are actually studying this, that the war in the future is going to be very distributed. It's going to be smaller forces on the edge of the battlefield that actually decide, collect data, get information, make sense out of the information, plan a mission, prosecute the mission or execute the mission, and then they move.
Are
they
we
move
at
very
the
fast.
stage of
That's what this is.
machine-on-machine warfare now at this stage?
You
Or
know,
are you going to
so-
take the soldier out of it?
So I'm glad you asked that question because it's a very, very good question. It's really misunderstood. We're in Davos, Switzerland, right? A very nice place, and there's a public emotional sort of disconnect with saying that a machine-operated drone or weapon may not be morally good. Every time they fire a HIMAR or fire any missile, it's a fire and forget missile. What happens afterwards, you have no idea. Yeah. And that's why 60, 70% of the time, they don't hit the right target. And there's so much collateral damage or waste. Why don't you allow something that can actually act more responsibly and has rules on it that says if you don't hit the right target, you don't hit it? That's why the innocent collateral damage on Switchblade is 0. And there's very many other things like that in military nowadays. So I think it's a misunderstood concept that we're okay throwing a bomb, a 1,000-kilogram bomb in a neighborhood or a space.
Over there.
Yeah, but a very highly surgically operated weapon that is specific to go do a mission, and by the way, if it doesn't find the target or it doesn't think it's safe enough, you could wave it off. That's another feature of Switchblade. It's considered morally not good. That's the concept.
Great answer. This seems that's a great segue for you to comment, Lorenz, because you're working with Ukrainian companies on the software side to develop operating systems without getting into state secrets. Those operating systems are designed to do what?
To hit targets. Pretty straightforward.
Precision, but we're talking about precision targeting, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So it's along the lines of what Wahid was saying, is that the nature of warfare is sort of, instead of carpet bombing and scattering, which is what actually the Russians do it deliberately. They don't do it just because they can't shoot straight.
Mines, look at the mines.
They just obliterate everything in front of them, and then they move forward. So that's a tactic that they've used for hundreds of years. In this situation, how is what you're doing with the Ukrainian drone companies changing the nature of warfare?
I think if you talk about the nature of warfare, I think the one key thing we have is it's an absurdly quick and existential innovation cycle if you're developing in country. And you cannot replicate that. You can just be there. That's the only way to to experience it, to have it. That's also why, on average, I'm very, very humble with respect to any Ukrainian defense tech company, because the rate of innovation, the quality they're producing, the problem fit they're achieving is incredible. And so, if you ask me, like, what is the key thing, is that we've moved the development a little bit almost like in World War II back into the problem space in Ukraine, and that hasn't happened in the West in the past decades to the same degree. And I think if we're talking about the technology itself, so what additional levels of autonomy are we seeing? I personally believe we will see two things, and I don't want to predict when, because technology is sometimes unpredictable. But one is true autonomous mass. So right now we have a relationship in general still of one drone, one operator, one pilot. It's still flown by hand, or at least guided by an operator. I think we will see very quickly a one operator to 10, 20, 100, and an autonomous mass. The second thing is that you alluded to, I totally believe in drone against drone warfare, because as Wahid said, it's a good thing to send them forward and to not risk human lives. And I think that's going to change things dramatically, because the first line of contact might be in the future machines.
And it's not just drones. I mean, there was a report with the 13th Brigade of the National Guard, the Kharkiv Brigade, where they experimented with a combined arms warfare robotics assault, and using machines on the ground, both tracked and wheeled, drones in the air that were doing both recon and attacking, and then they had other machine guns that were self-propelled, and the Russians were freaked out because they didn't know who to shoot at. There were no bodies there, and that was probably the first instance, at least the first reported instance, of how you had a combined arms warfare maneuver that it didn't involve people behind with the joysticks, but they weren't on the battlefield. And so the other interesting part, and that sort of plays into this whole idea of the partnerships that Oleksandr was talking about and how to coordinate this, how rapid this is evolving, which you just talked about, Lorenz, seems to be a challenge for the big prime contractors. They're having, many of them are my clients, and I could see they struggle with this notion of how do we innovate fast enough. And so there was the big article in the Financial Times about your company partnering with Rheinmetall, which is very, I can personally tell you, I found them very forward-looking. But they seem to have understood that they hit a wall with something and need you to work together.
I don't think necessarily that an established prime has to hit a wall to embrace innovation. Maybe they also just are very, very competitive. So I'm not so much bought into the notion that established primes, including AeroVironment, need to be displaced.
No, prime.
We have been 20 years, but not a different kind of prime.
Different kind of prime.
And I think what really, and we've seen this so many times in software in general. Now, speaking about that specifically, that there is a certain level of adoption of new capabilities through software that can move just a lot faster than a hardware-defined process, and it totally makes sense for established companies with an established customer base to look for new ways to do business. I mean, it's the defense industry has so many partnerships and joint ventures, and it's disorienting.
Very incestuous, yeah.
And so for any big prime basically embracing software-defined warfare as a principle makes total sense to me, and that's also a way to acquire talent through partnerships much, much faster than you otherwise could organically. And I mean, this has happened so many times across so many different industries.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. And this sort of raises the question now, what is the impact of all of this going to be, moving to our next block, on regional and global security? President Zelensky gave a great speech. Every speech he gives, I think, is the best speech I've ever heard him give, and then he just keeps going. But his emphasis on Europe's not even responsibility, but wake-up call. And there was a great article that somebody said that Europe got a wake-up call with the invasion. The problem with that is that the wake-up call is not the same as getting out of bed. And so they've lost 3 years of faffing around waiting for the Americans to do something to manage this conflict to a standstill. That's now become clear that's what U.S. strategy was going to be. Has not worked out great, or we paid for it. So when Ukrainians feel that, you know, the West was fighting Putin down to the last Ukrainian. And so that's how this war was going to end, which is really an awful place to be, I can tell you. But this, it seems, what President Zelensky was talking about was that Ukraine has now emerged as the leader, or a leader, among European nations for moving the security and the economic dial forward. And that is an enormously interesting concept. And because it means we're not waiting for donors to come and help us, because this is our war with Russia. He was really clear today that this is Europe's war for its own survival at this point in time. And Oleksandr, what do you know, sitting in the government, watching what these folks are doing, and looking at this from a geopolitical standpoint, what are the implications? Do we need NATO per se, or do we need the EU? Do we create a coalition of the willing along the lines of the Jeff countries? That the countries who have the military capability are prepared to use it and can work with Ukraine as a full partner. So we don't need to beg to get into a club. We are actually a founding member of a club. Is this something that's being talked about in your shop?
When we first started discussion about Ukraine joining EU and Ukraine joining NATO, at that point we've been just asking for that membership. Now the discussion we started with previous administration of US and we will go on with the new administration is quite different. We say, listen, you helped us really much, you keep helping us and you will keep helping us on, but one day we will join EU and NATO and we'll come with assets, we'll come with value. We've got the strongest army on the continent, capable army, and we've got the strongest industry on the continent, capable industry. The industry you will need in EU and NATO one day. Hopefully not, but you better be prepared. I allowed myself to be not ready for the war one time in my life. I don't want to be not ready any day more. And I don't wish it to anyone. Thinking how you can get your family out of the town, it's something you better don't get in this position. You was right that we've been rethinking and reshaping the way we fight. It's quite different now from day one of the war. You've seen what we've done at the sea with having no fleet, but having a mosquito fleet of sea drones. That's something the whole world will need. You've seen what we've done with drones. We've got mortars and we've got mortar drone, FPV. We've got artillery and we've got artillery drone. We've got long-range drones. We've got what we call now rocket drone, something that is quite similar to missile, cruise missile. And this year would be the year of unmanned land systems. Watch the front line.
Watch that space.
Yep. And all types of unmanned systems is something the whole world will need to be more secure. AI. My president said that now, unfortunately, Europe is lagging behind, and it's true. When Scholz was in Ukraine, we showed him AI-driven solutions. Yaroslav was one of those presenting his solution. And we've got over 10 companies in Ukraine, including German companies, also present in Ukraine and doing something with Ukrainian industry. And that's something the whole world will need as well. And out of 2 AI solutions, one is auto-targeting. We already got this solution. It's already scaling up. German solutions, Ukrainian solutions, all of them are scaling up. There is the only one AI solution that we expect later this year. That would be the swarm. That would be a game changer as well. And hopefully it's going to come soon. Right, Eveline?
That's a great segue over to Eveline. And when you're looking at your portfolio companies, or if you're looking at, Yaroslav got all sorts of credit and now he leaves. Yeah. We'll make sure we mention you again, don't worry. But when you're looking at your portfolio companies, okay, and you're looking at new companies, because you invest in companies that are abroad, that do only Ukraine-related work, do you find that the European companies in particular are looking at Ukraine because they are lagging behind, they can't get the resources in their companies, and so they need the access to both the polygons, the time in the air, as well as the technology?
It depends. We have two categories, broadly speaking. One category is, the startups, the early stage companies, and they are looking at Ukraine as a fast-to-market, beyond the mission, obviously, because these are allied nations, but they are looking at Ukraine as a fast-to-market place and a laboratory. And to us, them putting Ukraine at the top of the agenda is a qualifier. So that's the one category. The other category is the established companies that want to stay in the game. So they need to come to Ukraine to familiarize themselves with what's successful. So they modernize and they keep innovating at the same speed and don't get displaced by the early stage companies. So those are the two categories. Now, one thing I wanted to mention is Ukraine is very good at developing point solutions for specific missions. The next step change is to look at the battlefield as a system, to look at the interdependencies of these point solutions. And for that, I think we would strongly benefit from more collaboration with the West, okay? So you have, for example, strike drones. They got very good at terminal guidance, precision, getting to the right target at cost. One thing to remember is Ukraine fights cost-efficient wars. So, it's very, a lot of times we say, we don't have that in the market, we need to develop. And somebody says, oh, come on, we have already. We have interceptors, we have, yes, you do, at cost-prohibitive stage, which we don't accept. So innovation is required not only in product, but in cost. So you need to develop at the cost that Ukraine is willing to pay, and to be honest, that any nation should be willing to pay. Nations should not be overpaying because they will be eaten for lunch by the Chinese if they continue to pay the prices that they do in the US. So going back to how we can work together with the West is Ukraine is good at point solutions. It's time to step up the game with systems. So these weapons that were developed for specific missions need to start talking to each other. You need to have an operating system that all the sensors from all these point solutions feed into, and giving the commanders, even the regular soldier, the ability to explore the productivities of these weapons working together.
And that's the amazing thing in this sector is that, you can freelance as a company to find your own brigade, and you say, okay, here, test this stuff out for us. They'll give you a report that would, blow a management consultant's mind, and you go back, you iterate, you go back, and you do all of this, and then you go for certification to the MOD or to MSI, which is really an incredible. It's very efficient, and it seems I don't know that there's an analogy anywhere.
No, there isn't.
For this. It's been going on for 3 years.
Yes.
It's now a normal process. Oh yeah, well, I can introduce you to the 14th. No, I think the 122nd is probably better. But I mean, it's an incredible discussion. I want to ask Nataliya about the lessons learned from all of this, but I'm going to ask Wahid first, so that you can wrap him into your comments. You wanted to jump in on this, and what I would also like you to add is some thoughts on the global impact of what's happening in Ukraine that you see beyond the borders.
Yeah, so I mean, as a defense prime contract, a very different one, the kind that actually that we've been preaching for 20 years, that the defense industry has to change, and I think it's changing everywhere. We had to be highly, highly vertically integrated from the beginning. So essentially almost every subsystem, a drone system, whether it's loitering munition or not, is fairly complicated, it's complex. It has many, many subsystems, right? And so when you go into commercial airline business, for example, if you make an airplane, the engine manufacturer and the cockpit control manufacturer and the avionics manufacturer, the air conditioning manufacturer, the airframe manufacturer, they're all different companies. They get together. That's not the case for us as a company because these industries didn't exist. So we had to have expertise there. Our exposure in Ukraine, number one, has been that Ukraine, we realized from a very early on, has tremendous, they have all the ingredients that we believe are necessary for an industrial base to be able to be one of the best in the world, if not the best in the world. They have highly, highly educated, talented people. They are motivated. They understand technology really well, and they have learned tremendously over the last several years. And they have a history of defense, Antonov, et cetera, et cetera. So I think, and of course, this Petri, the dish that's been Petri dish that's been in Ukraine has been a tremendous learning lesson from us. We've actually made a lot of changes. We have people in country engage with them directly to actually learn from various tactics, maneuvers, strategies, and operational concepts that we've actually made changes on our products in a matter of months, weeks. So I think this long term, once the peace is in place and this war is over, which we all welcome, is going to change the industry. Ukraine is going to be, and that's why we already signed multiple agreements with help of Oleksandr and his organization. We actually already applied for the approval from the US government for the co-production of Switchblade in Ukraine, but that's just one of the items. We've actually received approval recently for another initiative that we have, and it's going really well. So we are talking to at least 50 different companies within Ukraine. And our goal is to actually not only help them, as Eveline mentioned, because they do need some help and collaboration is important, but how we can develop end-to-end solutions that actually addresses not just a point product, but a mission, an end-to-end mission solution is what they need in general. So, these different technologies are all interrelated. You cannot do, for example, the gimbal of a drone without the autopilot. The pilot has to know where to point the gimbal. So there's a connection between that and the weapon that's on board or the warhead. These things are very interrelated, and I think future is going to be tremendous for Ukraine.
There's so much there to unpack. Nataliya, go ahead and try. But I think that, on a high level, there are tons of lessons to be learned, and I think that we need to start thinking about what those are going to be for not just for Ukraine's sake, but for the sake of Western defense going forward, the things that President Zelensky was talking about today.
Yeah, I'll mention three, building on some of the points already raised. I think the first one, realizing that Ukraine is an asset, and not just in terms of new capabilities, not just in terms of new methods, but actually the biggest asset is people. It's this emerging cadre of warfighter technologists, innovators that are locked in this very rapid innovation cycle. That is hard, and that does not exist in this shape or form anywhere in the world. I think it would be a historic mistake for the West to not realize what asset that is, because that could serve as that DNA can serve as a foundation for transformation of Western defense industrial base. I think two more. One, look, I think we all learned that it's not only what you have when the war starts, it's your ability to surge, because many capabilities become irrelevant as the battlefield changes. So how do you develop and reshape Western defense industrial base to produce relevant capabilities at moderate to low cost, not just the high-end stuff at scale? I think finally, it's already been discussed, the distributed innovation, but I think it's also distributed deployment of capabilities. Like, requirements are changing way too fast for the warfighter to wait for the entire solution to be developed elsewhere and shipped to Ukraine in this case. And I think US in particular, as it thinks about helping partners around the world, needs to figure out the way to source solutions to partners and distribute them at edge, so that essentially, I think we need like a global defense industrial Lego, and then have pieces and give them to people who are closest to the problem. So I think that's the next level of transformation and the lesson that we need to learn. And for us, it will matter not just for Ukraine, but also for Taiwan, for many other partners that we are supporting.
Oleksandr, all of this stuff is going on in real time. It's like playing 5-layered chess. Is this not overwhelm the government? Is this not overwhelm the general staff? I mean, how do you keep your finger on the pulse of all of this and then channel it in the most appropriate way to make sure it's used at the places it needs to be used on the battlefield?
Then it's easy.
I thought
Getting back to the first question you asked me, what's the secret tool behind it? I would tell you. It's great people working together in one direction. It's not only great people at the stage. It's not only Geraint Smetanin, who is the youngest minister in the government. And you know what? He's been running a tank repair factory in Kharkiv in year 1 under siege with 3,000 people under his management. And you know what? My railway depot was right next to his factory. And I was shelled, heavily shelled. But you know what? I've got what missed his factory. He got times more. And he managed to run it in a proper way. Later, he managed 74 factories in one hands, in one company. It's Taras Chmut, who's been running public sector, and I personally tried to get him on the board in state company. A year ago, finally he's got on the board. He's on the board of Defense Procurement Agency. It's smartest members of parliament who somehow appeared to be fighting for defense industry in legislation. Galia, raise your hand. Guys like Yaroslav, who's been doing pets tools, but finally they turned to be doing great job in defense industry. Many, many other people. Lena, I hope one day Horizon will start funding defense industry as well. It's ESG in Ukraine because it helps make more Russians good Russians. And Eveline and Wahid were so right when they spoke about the cost or precision. You know what? We've started this war with bravery. Everyone knew Ukraine for bravery, for standing for the second army in the world. Later, we came with resilience, or ironness, as we call it. And you know what? Now we should be doing math, the mathematics of war. We should be counting everything. We count everything in defense industry. We should do more in the war itself. And finally, I feel, I don't know how, but last year at the same panel, I told one story that that night we hit St. Petersburg first. That was the first oil depot we hit with things made in Ukraine. Yes, we've been still asking for ATACMS, for, can I call this name here, Taurus? For many other missiles, for many other things to hit deep inside Russia. But already a year ago, we started hitting Russia with things made in Ukraine. And you know what? This night we hit Voronezh.
Yeah.
No one says anything. Last year it was a big news everywhere. Now we hit Russia deep inside every day, but no one says it's a good news.
Why? Because it's normal. That's what you want. You want the normalization of these kinds of activities. But I think that this is a great segue into the third block, the last block, which is how this is actually transforming Ukraine. Because the country, I've been in Ukraine 33 years, and the transformation that I've seen in Ukraine over the course of the years, it could not have happened in, let's put it this way, the total resistance, the people that you talked about, Oleksandr, was what actually saved Ukraine at the beginning of the war. We didn't have a Ministry of Defense that was capable of sourcing the logistics, of sourcing the weapons, of supplying the troops. The entire Ukrainian army was run on the back of volunteers. And everybody, we had a saying that you were either on the front line or you were working for the front line. And that unity of the Ukrainian people, which is, you know, people say, oh, it's starting to crack and we have problems with mobilization. I mean, the fact that it has remained this solid for 3 years is quite incredible. And those changes, but the country has changed. We have used to say that when you were running for president, you couldn't win without taking the East, but you couldn't govern without the center and the West. The East has changed. The East is not the East it was. In fact, most of the East is in the West and abroad. So the dynamic, the political dynamic, the economic dynamic, the social dynamic is inevitably changing. And I would like to, even for our friends from abroad, you know, for you to comment on those as well. But I would like to start with Eveline in terms of what you've noticed as the transformation that the defense sector and the defense tech in particular has prompted. You're going to go down the line, and you get the last word.
Well, before I talk about defense specifically, I would say that the biggest change, I guess, is the discovery and deep love for its national identity. Because without the understanding of their national identity, they wouldn't be fighting. And I think this war was kind of like the final step in understanding. And part of that national identity is understanding its neighbor and preserving that national identity. So in my view, Ukraine has to and will be forever militarized, and strongly so. And of course, that means a strong defense sector. So that is a must. It has to be part of its DNA. Now, then you're like going to the pragmatic side of it. And the pragmatic side of it is 1 million people will be coming back to normal lives soon. What do you do with these highly trained, highly experienced, knowledgeable people? You would be silly, and I told Wahid that this morning, not to leverage them towards creating in Ukraine the most consequential, influential, and interesting defense hub in the world, right? You have trained people at low cost, unfortunately I have to add that, that know what they're doing and can add a lot of value to the rest of the world. So that's what I will work on, and that's what I think every Ukrainian understands and will execute on.
Excellent.
And I invited him to open his R&D center there.
So when's that happening? When's the opening?
I wish I could tell you all the details, but there's some stuff that we have to keep it a little bit quiet. There's several. We have a lot of. We are
Next
very
Thursday, Kiev.
Yeah, we're very well wedded to the Ukraine. I mean, for us, it's not just a moral responsibility, but it's also, I have a personal connection to this too. Because I mean, as you know, I was born and raised and lived there under the Russian.
You were a refugee.
I was a refugee. I lived in Afghanistan. I mean, I came to the United States because of the Soviet invasion. Who'd have thought 25 years later that I was going to make Switchblade for Ukraine?
That's right.
Or for the United States. Yeah, I mean, I know exactly what it's like. The best part of the whole event here for me today was the President Zelensky's speech, actually. While you think it was not great, I thought it was the best one, because here's why I say that. War is tough, extremely difficult. I've lived through it, you've lived through it, many people lived through it, and he described how the best solution is not to have a war, and this deterrence, but how do you have deterrence? If we roll back the tape to before the war started, what would have Europe done, United States would have done, all of us would have done to avoid that? We would have empowered and enabled Ukraine to be so strong that nobody besides even Russia dares to even think about attacking it. That's the best solution for war. No war. It's peace through strength, as Ronald Reagan said, right? So the reason I think President Zelensky's speech is so powerful and so meaningful today is he said, Europe, don't let us repeat that story.
Yeah.
Don't let us play that movie again. We have a chance as a society, as a region, as a continent, to do something about it. And we have all the ingredients to do it. This is not, you mentioned 5% of GDP. 5% of GDP? To avoid that, Ukraine would pay 50% to avoid it.
We're close to that now.
You know, of course, of course. United States during World War II, I think the percentage of GDP on defense was 30 some odd percent. 35, 30. I've heard statistics between 30s to 40%. United States. Anybody who was making cars were making airplanes, they were making it for defense. You couldn't find an industry that was not making it for defense. So the point here is, to your point about this, Ukraine is an example of what we want to avoid. Avoid this war, but the way you do it is you're going to have these bullies in the world. They're not going to go away. It's been in existence since the beginning of humanity. And you got to have the strength not to allow them to attack you.
Well, I want to also say that
100%.
yeah.
And that's the key. And Ukraine can play a major role in that.
Yeah, I loved Zelensky's speech today. Yeah, like you said, it's just gets better, right? And Europe needs to stop shooting itself on the foot. I'll give you specific examples, okay? So how can it be that the NATO Innovation Fund, the $1 billion fund, NATO Innovation Fund, only invests in dual use? Let me say, I don't invest in dual use, I invest in military capabilities because I am a defense fund, okay? So what Europe needs is focus. You are asking the military entrepreneurs to not have focus, to be sitting in two chairs at the same time while the enemy, you know what they're doing. And then you are debanking defense entrepreneurs. I got debanked twice because I do stuff with defense and Ukraine. That's immediately a red flag, right? So Europe needs to get focused and serious and stop debanking defense entrepreneurs. They need to on the contrary, create facilities, create banks that are specialized to better serve the defense entrepreneurs and not keep shooting themselves in the foot. Diana is the accelerator. Now I'm going to press everybody's button at the end of the panel.
All right.
Diana Accelerator, under the NATO umbrella. The head of Diana has never been to Ukraine. They do nothing with Ukraine. Yes, they do nothing with Ukraine. And guess in what they invest? Climate tech. Get serious. You know, you're a defense alliance. You need to be investing in defense tech exclusively, okay? Things that kill Russians, to be more specific. Then you have, for instance, the missing in action folks, right? We need AI. You know, Lorenz was talking about it. We need AI. France has a very strong AI ecosystem. As far as I know, there's not a single French AI company operating in Ukraine to help automate drones. If anybody knows,
we're getting there with them. We're getting there. Right? We're
so I'm pressing everybody's button now.
Working on it. Working on it. Can we move on?
Yeah.
We're running out of time, and I'd like to get Lorenz's view on transformation in Ukraine, what you've seen and where you think it's going.
I mean, a lot has already been said. I think I don't want to talk about the civic society because, you know, I don't live there every day. I'm oftentimes there, actually, you asked me if I moved to Kiev. So often we run into each other. But I think what I'm seeing is, I'm seeing a lot of resilience. I can speak to that. I'm seeing an incredible defense tech ecosystem that I can just add to that, needs to be leveraged, needs to be nurtured. And I think that, yeah, it's underrepresented. To your point earlier, the amount of capital invested within Ukraine in defense tech is actually really small compared to the global VC landscape. And I don't understand, like 2 years in, and with somebody like Eveline there as a trusted go-to person, why there is not more flow, because the solutions are incredible.
Yeah. Nataliya, coming back almost full circle to where we started with you, you know, I think there's a lot of discussion in the press about, you know, that Russia is so strong and it's moving forward and it's pressing, etc. Whereas, you know, when you read actually Russian commentators, you realize how weak and brittle things appear to be in Russia. This is now an attrition game, and who can outlast the other? And it's not about armies. Is it Ukrainian society that is going to be stronger and outlast Russian society?
Look, I think it's important not to underestimate the adversary. They have concrete capabilities and strengths that are well discussed. What I would say, though, rounding out this conversation, look, the combined GDP of US, NATO states, non-NATO allies is 63 trillion. Russia's is 2 trillion. Like, if the West leans in, Russia loses. And we were talking about Ukrainian transformation. It's important to understand that Russia is transforming too. Russia 2025 is not Russia 2022. And that was bad enough that it invaded a neighbor that it thought was so militarily weak you could take it in 3 days. Like, Putin has wasted over 800,000 of his people killed and wounded for effects that are arguably mediocre. That is transformed, and Russian society normalized that. So we're not going back to the status quo, and I agree that it is time for Europe to create a credible deterrent to the problem that it is gonna own. The final point I'll make, because we talked a lot on this panel about how to discuss lethality, how to discuss investment in defense. We also need to reframe that conversation, because right now, it's operated inside of Russian drone box. Russia has invested tremendous resources to essentially frame any defense as escalation. For those who you read Orwell's 1984, right, Pieces of War, it's the same thing. They're trying to frame any Ukraine's defense as escalation, any investment in Ukraine's defense as escalation, any delivery of Western capability as escalation. So this is actually a leadership challenge to restore the strategic clarity and remind everyone that this is a war of choice. And
right.
You know, we're at Davos here, what a lot of people consider the leaders, like that's the task, to explain the free world why it needs tools to remain free.
Excellent, thank you. Oleksandr, what do you see Ukraine as in 5 years?
As Eveline said, national identity. You probably remember we've been always fighting with Russia centuries ago, and we've been always producing weapons. So probably Eveline is right, we would be fighting for centuries again, but the point is how we will fight. As Howard Buffett said one day, West would never fight like we do. Wahid, coming from Air Force, knows that air superiority is crucial. That's why Switchblade is coming from air but landing on the land. Wahid got great personal story. Finally, it's a good story, but it's quite complicated. And that gives him the motivation to come over the ocean for this panel. Let's credit him for that. I've seen you've been trying to get all the secrets from him, including the one that we would be co-producing Switchblades in Ukraine, including some others, but please don't then. Leave something to announce later.
Thank you.
Lorenz said that sometimes we meet so often in Kyiv that I'm thinking whether he already moved or not yet, on the way. I'm sure that one day Ukraine would be a destination for many great people to come and to see what we do. And Nataliya says right, we shouldn't underestimate the enemy. That's something that gives me the power to wake up and move on and do more and more. They would never get away. They would never step down, and that's the mind we should have in our mind. For that reason, we should be rebuilding our country as the arsenal of the free world.
Excellent. I think we're going to probably wrap up on that note. I can say personally, I want to thank each and every one of you for the contribution that you make. I mean, I'm on a flight path for Shaheds. My house is. I hear them flying over, and every morning and every night, I pray to God and thank the ZSU. And it comes back to the people. And you know, I've done things here in 33 years, most of which I'm reasonably proud of. But the thing that I'll be most proud of for the rest of my life is that I had the opportunity to join the armed forces in some capacity, because all of us No, you know, I mean, it's actually about these people. It's not about me at all. And, you know, when you love something so fiercely, it's an easy choice at the end of the day. And that feeling, I'll never forget that feeling we had in the first weeks of the war when everybody came together. Everybody, and we knew that people that wrote us off. I mean, my panic-stricken calls from my family, I stopped taking them. I couldn't handle it. And I've never experienced such fear in my life as during the defense of Kiev. I mean, it was just raw. But you know, you just keep going. And because everybody else is doing the same thing. And when I was at Ukraine Invest, I used to talk about promoting Ukraine as a European Ukraine, bringing Europe into Ukraine. I think President Zelensky today actually laid out a really good framework for a Ukrainian Europe. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.